Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we are diving right into a massive 2,000-year epic today. This is the story of how civilization's rules were written, lost, and then, miraculously, found again. We're going to trace a journey that spans continents, survives the absolute collapse of empires, and ultimately builds the legal foundation of the world we're living in right now.
But we have to start with a massive mystery. Think about it for a second. How exactly did a single dusty manuscript from an empire that literally vanished end up becoming the invisible scaffolding of our modern society? It's a wild historical puzzle we're going to piece together today. The laws we rely on every single day, they didn't just appear out of thin air. They survived through this crazy combination of imperial ambition, pure luck, and centuries of total scholarly obsession.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll track the origins of Roman law, Justinian's grand compilation, its loss in the Dark Ages, the incredible rebirth in Bologna, and finally, how it shaped modern European law. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, the origins of Roman law, the foundation.
You know, it's actually fascinating when you look at how incredibly small Rome started out. Back around 1000 BC, we're just talking about Indo-European tribes, specifically the Latins and Sabines, settling down on the left bank of the Tiber River. They were just living in these small, scattered hill settlements, doing basic agriculture and cattle rearing. But right across the river were the Etruscans, a vastly more advanced people living in these powerful, independent city-states. So, surrounded by those formidable neighbors, this modest little settlement desperately needed structured rules if they were going to survive and manage a growing society.
But before they had any complex courts or massive legal texts, early Roman law was raw. It was visceral, highly localized, and incredibly personal. It all centered on the frankly terrifying power of the paterfamilias. Imagine a legal system where your father has absolute, literally unlimited power over your life and your property until the day he dies, and it doesn't matter how old you are. He was the only person with any rights in private law. The only things keeping that immense power in check were religious norms and a very strong sense of social control within the community.
So out of this intense tribal reality, the Romans eventually got around to codifying their early rules into what's known as the 12 Tables, or the Leges 12 Tabularum. The famous Roman historian Livy revered this text. He actually called it the Fons Omnis Publici Privaticae Juris, the source of all public and private law. It became the absolute bedrock upon which all their future highly complex legal frameworks would eventually be built.
Moving on to Section 2, Justinian's grand compilation, the empire strikes back.
Fast forward a bit to the 6th century AD. The Western Roman Empire? Gone. It completely collapsed under the migrations of Germanic tribes. But the Eastern Roman Empire is actually still holding on, and here, an emperor named Justinian is trying desperately to save his culture's identity. But he ran into a massive problem. Centuries of classical Roman legal writings had basically devolved into a chaotic mess. I mean, imagine trying to unify 1,517 papyrus scrolls full of contradictory, totally outdated rules. It was the ultimate administrative headache. So under his top official, Tribonian, a commission faced a colossal task. They had to extract the usable parts from centuries of classical writings and somehow compress it all into one unified, contradiction-free system. And what they came up with was an absolute masterpiece of legal engineering. They distilled centuries of history into 4 highly organized, easily digestible sections. First up, you had the Institutiones, basically an introductory textbook for first-year law students. Second was the Digesta, which was the massive core compilation of classical jurist law. Third, the Codex Justinianus, a collection of imperial laws that were still valid, dating all the way back to the 2nd century. And finally, the Novellae, which collected the brand new laws Justinian passed after 534 AD. This whole thing was designed to apply for all time.
Which brings us to Section 3, Lost in the Dark Ages, the Great Erasure. Okay, here is the ultimate plot twist. Right after Justinian finalizes this masterwork in Latin, the geopolitical map just shatters. The East, where Justinian actually ruled, gradually stopped speaking Latin. By the 7th century, Greek became the official legal language, which meant Byzantine scholars couldn't even read Justinian's original Latin text anymore. Meanwhile, in the West, Italy was quickly overrun by invading Langobards. This highly complex Roman law simply lost its social backing. For centuries, literally centuries, the most substantial part of the code, the Digesta, was completely forgotten. It just vanished into the shadows of the early Middle Ages. To really grasp how earth-shattering it was when they finally rediscovered Justinian's code, you gotta look at what replaced it in the meantime. Over in the West, Germanic rulers issued their own very localized legal codes. Compared to the hyper-organized, deeply philosophical Roman system they used to have, these early medieval tribal laws, which later humanists would dismissively call Barbarengesetze or barbarian laws, were just fundamentally simpler and highly fragmented. Europe was essentially operating on fractured local customs that were entirely disconnected from the sweeping logic of classical Rome.
All right, Section 4. The Law Reborn in Bologna, Cracking the Code. Out of nowhere, literally out of the blue in northern Italy, an intact manuscript of the forgotten Digesta surfaces. Known to history as the Littera Florentina, this document was a total bombshell. For medieval scholars, this wasn't just some dusty historical artifact. To them, it was like discovering alien technology. It possessed an intellectual depth that was just totally unmatched by anything else in their era. They treated it as a timeless revelation, a literal ratio scripta, or written reason itself. Now, the guy who truly cracked this text was a rhetoric teacher named Ennius, working in Bologna during the late 11th century. Ennius started painstakingly reading and annotating the dense margins of this ancient text, and in doing so, he founded a scholarly movement known as the Glossars. This intellectual gold rush wasn't just about a bunch of guys reading an old book. It literally birthed the very first modern university. Students were flocking to Bologna from all over Europe, basically inventing the concept of law school as we know it today. And, they didn't just keep this theory in the classroom. These newly minted legal scholars took all this Roman knowledge back to their home countries across Europe. They started taking over high administrative and judicial roles, gradually replacing the unlearned local lay judges. In practice, they blended these ancient Roman concepts with church law and local Germanic traditions, creating a really effective hybrid system known as the usus modernus. So ancient Rome was suddenly and practically administrating medieval Europe.
Let's bring it all together in Section 5. Shaping modern European law, the legacy lives. As Europe rolls into the era of the Enlightenment, countries start wanting to draft their own modern national legal codes. But here's the thing. When they went to draft these modern frameworks, like the famous French Code Civil or the German Bürgerliches Gesetzbuch, they absolutely did not start from scratch. Every single one of these famous national codes basically copy-pasted the scientific DNA of Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis. It served as the fundamental architecture for all of modern civil law. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought to ponder. From the absolute terrifying power of the ancient paterfamilias on the muddy hills of early Rome to a massive compilation in Constantinople, through centuries of literal darkness to a miraculous rebirth in a medieval Italian classroom, this law survived. So the next time you sign a complex legal contract, buy a house, or even just read a modern statute, ask yourself, are we literally just echoing the ghosts of ancient Rome, still speaking through the invisible scaffolding of our modern lives? Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey.